All right, everybody, just a quick note before we get started. This is going to be the last episode of what I'm dubbing season 1 of No Set Path. It was never my intention to have seasons with the show, but now that we're 20-something episodes down the line, I think it makes a little more sense to take a little break, build up a backlog of interviews, and be able to release episodes a little bit more regularly and consistently for you. We are not going anywhere. We have a lot of great guests coming up, a lot of great interviews in the pipeline, and we're going to start doing some in-person stuff here in the studio. So stay tuned for all of that, but I think it makes sense to have just a little bit of a hiatus while we build that back up. That's about it. And here we go with the show. Today's guest is designer and creative director Jeremy Perez-Cruz. Jeremy has worked in the brand identity space for a long time, and he's held roles at Etsy, Skillshare, Buzzfeed, Uber. You have definitely seen his work out there in the wild. Currently, he's running his own brand consultancy called Parts Per Million, and he's absolutely killing it in the space. He also goes under the moniker Sleeping Planes in the world of photography. He's built up a reputation as a New York City street photographer with a killer eye, the role photography has played in his creative process, and a talk he's giving at Adobe Max, which is happening this week. It was really a pleasure to sit down with Jeremy and talk about his journey. And without further delay, here's the interview. I'm really taking this opportunity to go through my little Rolodex of creatives that I know and have worked with or have been associated with. And you live at an interesting intersection for a couple of reasons, not only on the photography side, which is how I know you and how we met through mutual friends, but then also on the design and brand side, which is interesting to me. And I'm kind of curious how it all really fits together.
Sure.
You've been in the brand design, creative management world for how long now? How long have you been in that?
Almost 25 years.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did you start? What was your first thing out of school?
Well, it all started with music. I was a career musician, for lack of a better term. I didn't really make any money, but
yeah, same.
Yeah. But it was sort of I was in bands in high school, and I was we need a flyer. Who's going to make the flyer? I'm I guess I'll make it. And so it was even before I had a computer. It's so funny because I think kids are born today with computers in their hands. But I didn't have a computer until my senior year of high school. So I was hand drawing and doing paste ups and mechanicals and collaging, tour posters and flyers together. And that was sort of my start to graphic design. My dad was a commercial artist, so he ran tours and magazines in the Bahamas when I was a kid, and he always did portraits and sign painting and just kind of whatever. He was not a jack of all trades, but just a pretty traditional commercial artist in the sense of, he would take pictures at bars and put them on keychains for people, and he would do caricatures and portraits, and he would sign paint, and that was sort of what he's done my entire life. So it's not I had never done anything creative visually. But music was the thing that forced my hand. And then that year I got a computer, and it had a pirated copy of Photoshop on it. And then I got a little bit more serious about it and started designing CD covers and t-shirts and all the stuff that people need in bands. And that sort of kicked it all off. And what I found is I was a pretty proficient drawer, if you will. And I had a scholarship to SCAD for drawing. Cool. I had gone to community college for a couple of years, and they had offered me a decent scholarship to come for drawing. And I sort of passed on that to go on tour. I had the opportunity. We were on Warped Tour that year, and we were doing a few months and had a few of the main stage shows. So I kind of was deferred college for a little bit. And in doing that, and being on tour, a lot of bands were who designed your shirt, or who made your stickers or whatever. I'm oh, I did. I can do that for you. And that's sort of how I started charging for the work. Again, not a lot of money, but after, I don't know, I started touring in 1997 or 8, and by 2002, when I finally took some breaks and started really doubling down on school, or 2001, I guess, because I had done 2 years of community college before kind of deciding to do art school. And yeah, I was just oh man, I'm doing this thing in the background whenever I have free time for other bands and for record labels and for local businesses. And I'm making 100x the money I was making on tour. And I was on tour, 6 to 9 months out of the year. And so that's sort of what kickstarted it at the very, very kind of beginning of my design career. And then while I was at school, I was just like working. Like I think unlike a lot of the other students, I had clients. And so, I would go and do college projects, then I would go home and then I would like clock in for the night shift and, design logos and different stuff. And yeah, I was working at a coffee shop in the mornings, I was going to school in the afternoons, and I was doing graphic design at night. And it was great, but I was able to leverage like a lot of my kind of employment as like credit. So I didn't like, I kind of skipped portfolio class and I skipped like advanced graphic design too, because by that time I was fully employed. It first began as I worked at a gallery and publishing house, and they were sort of an offshoot of Rizzoli, and they specialize in fine art. And so I was doing like photo scanning for like big canvases and then color correcting them for print, for mostly limited edition prints. And then before that, I was working in the dark corner of a printing house doing kind of paste ups with negatives still, because this was like 2000. And so a lot of my early work was like in print production, both with fine art and also like in a traditional printing house.
So it's almost like developing a skill set out of necessity, going back to the music part,
Yeah.
where really just bootstrapping your own like band's promotional materials.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And then, working in the print shop and kind of getting a taste of the photo world, even though I don't think you got into photography as much or as passionately till later. We'll get there. I do want to know what band you were in on Warped Tour.
Oh, I was probably in like 10 different bands. The one that I did the most of my touring with was a sort of post-hardcore ska related band called the Spit Valves. And
Okay.
my previous band, Preferred 53, which was like my sort of end of high school band, we toured with these guys a lot. And long story short, the bassist got arrested for something and his probation wouldn't let him leave the state. And so I got a call, hey, can you like learn 30 songs in 2 days? We're going to go on tour like tomorrow. And so I'd been studying to go to Berkeley for, jazz performance. And so I was like probably a more proficient like musician than most kids in the punk rock scene were. And I had really trained my ear. I'd done a ton of interval training and stuff for my Berkeley exam. And and so like I was like, yeah, I can learn 22-minute, punk rock songs in 2 days. And I did. And yeah, I hopped on a plane and met them. I think it was in New Orleans. And then we were just on tour for the next handful of years.
Man of many lives.
Yeah.
Many lives. Yeah.
It's super weird. Like, yeah, it's sort of like band and music life was like a huge part of my life from high school through even while I was in college. Like I would take, 23 credit hours in a semester so that I could take the winter and summer breaks and go on tour and still graduate in like a couple years versus, taking, one class here, one class there and just spread it out, which I did a fair amount of. But yeah, music really drove a lot of that because it was such a fully immersed, full circle. Like everything I did was revolved around it, from writing and composing and booking tours and project managing and like buying a van and making the connections to like doing all of the design and websites and everything else. So it's sort of like it really fulfilled like a lot of the things that I loved and that I still love in a way that I think it would be hard to find another. Like for me, it was like my real college. Like a lot of people go away to school and they stay in a dorm and they have this college experience. I lived in an apartment and went to school locally and just like went on tour for, 6 months out of the year. And all of my closest friends I met during those days. And I I don't know, it's just like a lot of blue sky. Like what needs to be in a concert poster? Like, I don't know, like I can make up whatever I want, right? Which was really satisfying at the time. But, as I got more into like brand design and advertising, the why and like what and like anchoring things in strategy and concept became greater. But at the time, it was just like, cool, I'm going to make a cool poster that will grab people's attention. And yeah, that's around the time I started taking a lot of photographs. My dad gave me his Canon AE1 film camera, and I used to take that on tour just to like, I don't know, weird stuff would happen all the time. But yeah, I don't know. It was just like an interesting time, a big chunk of my life. And I continued to play music and tour through until I moved to New York City basically in 2010. But I think the last tour I did was 2010. And, it was like a 2 or 3 week tour and it was great. We opened for Of Montreal and
Oh, cool.
Janelle Monáe opened some of the shows, which is like,
Oh,
I had never heard of her before. And it was actually the first show was at Music Hall of Williamsburg. And we were playing and like this like amazing, beautiful woman who was dressed incredibly. I'm like, who is this? And why is she backstage at our show? And then she went on stage and just like killed it. And, I was an instant fan.
I definitely connect with you on the music thing because that
Yeah.
was my world for a long, long time. And even back in the music days, where you kind of quantify it as like, oh, it's just like making posters for my band or whatever. You did hint at like, you're managing some tour booking or managing some logistics for the band, and kind of how I see you, right? What I know of you is as like an ideas guy, like a big picture
Yep.
person who kind of has this vision and helps bring it into reality. And it sounds like you had the pieces, the beginnings of that, even back in the music days where you're like, okay, we need a poster, like let's do this, shoot some photos, put it together. We're going to go on tour. Here's how we're going to do it. Like, it seems like you're very much like a take the reins and get shit done type of person. And that if you go through kind of your track record work wise, that seems to like hold true. So you and I met when you were at Uber, which is kind of like, as best I could figure out, kind of the middle of your trajectory, because I know you've been at, and you can fill in the gaps for me if I'm wrong here, but you've been at Etsy, Pepsi, Uber, Buzzfeed, Skillshare. You've contracted with the New York Times. Now you're doing your own consultancy, Parts Per Million. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, all of those roles or most of those roles, you've been in some sort of like creative lead or like, conceptual, like big picture role. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so to connect the dots a little bit, I had interned at a place called Juicy Temples, run by a really great guy named Klaus Heisch in Orlando. And they had called me and they needed some help with a film festival that they were designing. And yeah, and I went in and, the pay was not great, but like the opportunity to work on big brands and do all this like big thinking and really work in interactive and branding was really great. So I did that for a handful of years. Klaus took a partnership in New York City, dissolved the company, and then I worked in traditional advertising for 4 or 5 years as an art director. And I built a small team there, but I wasn't like people managing. And then eventually I wanted to work in-house and I wanted to move to New York City, and that's how Etsy came about. Randy Hunt, who is the creative director and then later VP of design there, was an old friend of mine from my touring days. And I was interviewing in New York for a different role, and he tweeted something like, looking for a part-time art director to work on some Etsy stuff, could be full-time. And I'm like, I'm in New York today. Can I like stop by? And it ended up working out. I had a great interview and they offered me the gig and I moved to New York. And I was this was in 2010. I think Etsy was 75 to 80 people at the time.
It was small. It was
Super
definitely small. Yeah.
And so I was the only person really in my department, and I reported into the product design department. And so for people watching or listening who aren't in tech, like product design means like digital products. So the website, the mobile app, different features like shipping, email, so on and so forth. And that's where, I was reporting into the product team. I learned how a tech company works, an early stage sort of startup. And then I had to build like a design and marketing team with Randy. And that's when I first started. It was more of a leadership. I was still like kind of doing my own thing and making a bunch of stuff. And then as we like hired people and shifted people around, like I became like a manager and had no training for it. And so
Yeah.
Etsy was the start of that. It was like art direction, management, a lot of like building the studio, but I was really bad at it. Like I think a lot of other people who are in creative fields who get really good at a discipline, whether it be design or filmmaking or whatever it may be, and then all of a sudden you're promoted because you're doing a really good job at that thing that you've trained your whole life for. And then your new job is something that you have no experience in whatsoever. And it's like people management. And it's really tough. And I didn't even know that I was bad at it. I didn't know what a good manager was because I didn't really have a great manager, most of my career. And I think I shit the bed a little bit. Like I don't think I was self-aware and emotionally mature enough to like step away from the work and give people the freedom and allow things to be mistakes. Yeah, and eventually one thing, Etsy was great, worked there for 4 years. They IPO'd and it seemed like a good point. We won the National Design Award from the Obamas in 2014, which was like a huge career achievement. And then I left and then I started working at PepsiCo, which is like a total 180. And
Yeah.
at Pepsi, it was weird because that's when I was still designing and I didn't have much of a team, but I was managing these like billion-dollar brands, like multiple billion-dollar brands, and I was on the global brand team. So I managed all of the global beverages across the world. And so, yeah, that was really interesting because I wasn't managing like large teams of creative people so much as I was managing a bunch of different agencies, like ad agencies, design studios, and stuff, and doing some hands on design, but so much more like giving consolidated feedback and interpreting what sort of the CMO and VPs and CEOs had to say about a project and trying to be that like catalyst between marketing managers who are MBA people who don't really have a lot of experience in giving quality creative feedback, and then these like really expensive, really well regarded creative studios who expected good feedback. And so it put me in a tough spot a lot of times trying to like toe the line between those things, but I got really good at making quick decisions and more so distilling kind of complicated information into a way that people could understand and agree upon. I was managing large groups of other creative people and like setting a vision and creating a roadmap and a little bit of design operations and a lot of just like consolidating feedback and trying to hit deadlines with quality work.
Yeah, well, let me jump in for a second before we move on up the ladder here. Why I really wanted to talk to you about this is because you're one of the few people I know that has held a lot of these roles and is really good at unpacking things and making them digestible. So I think something for people listening that might be a little ethereal is the concept of like creative director or art director, or what those actually are, and maybe the role shifts a little bit depending on what company you're at, but I think the essence is all the same, where it, like you said, it's the consolidation of all these different pieces and like really just putting the best idea forward in the most concise way for your clients. And it's really interesting because it sounds like you kind of fell backwards into this role unintentionally through like just your own creative output.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I like. I don't consider myself a natural leader, but I have no chill. Like, I am like a workaholic and I am relentlessly curious. I just want to understand how things work. And so I'm a
Yeah.
big like, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to figure it out person. And I've been that way, talking about the music stuff. Like, no one taught me how to book a tour. I just like figured it out. No one taught me how to like write a song. I just like figured it out. And then, no one really taught me how to design. I just sort of like poked around until I discovered some things. And I'm a pretty quick learner. And so like that curiosity multiplied by like speed of like learning and trying new things really set me up to like fall into a lot of stuff. And I think that's why I'm kind of a weird fit for like, people who are recruiting me for new roles, is like I am a player coach, absolutely. I like to be in it. But like, there's a bunch of designers coming onto the scene that like will push around pixels and make a much better design than I will have ever made in my career. And where I think a lot of the value that I add is in this sort of creative direction space, which I always viewed it as, because everything I do is sort of analogous to music in a way. There's like this music metaphor kind of sprinkled
Oh
throughout.
yeah.
I think a creative director is like a really good producer. And lately there's been a few, I think, audio or interview clips of Rick Rubin talking about his new book and like how what he does is like he's got great taste and trust in that taste and he knows how to get stuff done. And I'm paraphrasing here, but I've always thought like a creative director is like an awesome producer. And especially when you think about, going back to what I was just talking about with there are designers and art directors who are better than I've ever been, in the same way that like I don't think any producer is as good a singer as Beyonce, but she has producers, right? And the producer's role is to help keep a consistent vision, figure out the stuff that the artist who's really good at what they do doesn't know how to do, and then get the best out of that performance. And I think that's like very true of design management and creative direction and stuff like that. And then, as I get older and moving up the ladder or whatever, and I end up in these more executive types of positions, it's even one step removed from a lot of the detail work, like the pixels moving around. But it's even more important to like set roadmaps and have a inspiring and charismatic vision of where we're going and what needs to be done to hit those goals. And then there's all of the depth of knowledge around data and research and strategy that I've been really focused on sort of the back 5 years of my career, especially as it relates to brand, which is like the core of my like discipline, if you will.
I think an important point to take away from it is the concept of there's always going to be somebody better than you at whatever it is you're trying to do. I mean, that's just a fact of life. And, to tie it back to music, I learned that when I was like 14 or 15 and learning how to play guitar, and you figure it out more as you go through the motions and you grow and evolve and age and just have more life under your belt, is that it's not about being the best ever. It's just about what makes you unique and how do you take all these things that you're good at or interested in and form them into this combination that only you can do? And then where do you slot in with all that in like the bigger picture? Did you develop a passion for it, or is it more of like a means to an end? And I don't want to like downplay it. You've had a great career already. And, I think a lot of the folks I've talked to, and I think a lot of the folks that listen to a show like this are, more on the freelance side, where it's gig to gig to gig, and kind of shunning the idea of being in-house somewhere. And I'm really interested at the intersection of the two as someone who like is running his own, production studio and his own like brick and mortar podcast studio and like all this stuff, and getting more like exposed to the business side of things. I think this intersection is more interesting just for me personally. So I'm always curious, as someone who, has spent a lot of time at in-house, like big brand, big companies, is it something that you always had a passion for? Did you develop a passion for it? Or has it always just kind of been like, this is something I can do and I can do well, and it's a means to an end, for like a lack of a better term?
For me, I wouldn't call it a means to an end necessarily. One of my sort of rules when I was like, I may be back in-house again someday soon. Like this is my year of experimentation where I've been doing these sort of innovation sprints since 2017, and I've been doing them kind of in between jobs and on, free time. And I really wanted to double down and see, okay, can I run my own business for a year, and like how does it stack up against sort of the other work I'm doing? And a lot of that time is the great equalizer. And I think about what's the cost of a sunny day, and how many hours I've spent sitting in an office at a desk doing things that are like important relative to the goal of the company, which I think we live in a capitalist society, and making money and being successful, especially in the tech sector, is really important. But like maybe not as important relative to the time I'm spending in the world, whether it be with my wife or my family or my friends, or just like doing things like photography or experiments or music or whatever. And like I am unique in the sense that I understand the importance of money, and money buys you freedom, not necessarily happiness. But I'm okay making half as much money if it gives me twice as much time to just explore ideas. So that's a sort of like quick, like why I have parts per million. Going back to the other piece is, as I moved through different jobs, one of my deciding factors of whether to take a job or not is, do I know how to do it? And as long as I know how to do like 25% of it, I know I can add a lot of experience and value to help that company be successful. But like the thing I get out of it is like learning a new skill. And so for every job, whether it's going to Etsy and working in-house and then learning how a tech company and product design works, or going to Pepsi because I really wanted to see what it was like to work on a brand or series of brands that touch billions of people globally, and like really think about scale and how to scale a brand in a meaningful way that's not just like, does it look great, but like, does this translate to 200 languages? Like, when we do these photo shoots, do they work in these different like countries, and how many photo shoots do we need to do? And that idea of scale was really, really interesting. And just understanding how like a giant, Fortune 50 company operates. I only stayed there 2 years, mostly because the work going out into the world happened very slowly. And everything I've done has had this like extreme sense of urgency, which I like. I think it keeps me honest and it keeps my mind fresh. That
Yeah.
I was kind of excited to go back into tech, which is how I ended up taking the Uber job, which was a total cold call from an amazing recruiter, Lori Mann, who I love deeply. And she's just like, hey, your like tech startup experience and your big brand experience seems like a good fit for Uber, which at the time was 3 years old. And it had changed how I experienced New York City, from not being able to get cabs to Brooklyn, from the Lower East Side. I'm like, I literally live on the other side of the Manhattan Bridge. Just like, you can drop me on the corner, they just won't pick you up. To having, a cab at the push of a button in 2 minutes was really exciting. It was like crazy at the time. Fastest growing company in history, highest valued private company in history. And I had the opportunity to work on a brand that I thought was like the future of these billion-dollar brands. And it is. And to be able to like rebrand Uber, or like work on Uber marketing, was just like such a cool opportunity, where it wasn't Pepsi, which has been around for 200 years. But like, if I can like put my fingerprints on an Uber, I thought that was like an interesting opportunity to do something at that scale that was in the tech realm. And then the other side of it was just, I was just curious about it all, and like how it functioned and how it worked. And going there, I interviewed for a few weeks, took the job, and by the end of week one, I had a different job. And so it's one of those things that was like super interesting. But like, I took it because learning experience. And then Uber was really the place where I found myself managing a team of like 15 people, and that later grew to like 80 people. And Uber got really difficult around that time too, especially in 2015, 2016, 2016, 2017. A lot of bad PR, and like brand was the thing that was getting killed. Like, because it doesn't matter what you design or say, right? Like, brand is what people think. And, people loved Uber, the product, but they did not like Uber, the brand or the company. And it was really challenging, but I had a really awesome team, some that I inherited, part of the team I built myself. And despite things being really crazy at HQ, especially on the tech and engineering side, I don't know, our little team was just like trucking. And I doubled down on management and, leading with like empathy and kindness and collaboration. And I worked really hard. I read a ton of books. I took classes on my own dime. And eventually we instituted like an Uber management training program, because people reached out to our department, the brand department. They were like, how come everyone's not quitting your teams right now like they are in the rest of the company? And again, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And we were like, yeah, we work really hard on managing people. And that became sort of a really important part of my career from that point forward.
You're moving through these different roles and moving through these companies based on primarily what it sounds like, curiosity, a need to continue to learn and like challenge yourself, and even continuing to like evolve skill sets you didn't even know you had. So in terms of like developing a management skill set and things like that, it's like not backing down from challenges. It sounds like the more challenging, the better, no matter the context, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has a breaking point. And it's funny because I don't think it was until pretty recently, probably around Buzzfeed, I was like, I don't get stressed out about anything. I'm like totally chill. I don't have any anxiety. I just like come in and get shit done. But like looking back, I was like, oh, all these other things were just like an output of my highly functioning anxiety. And, once I learned to recognize it and things felt like not great at times, I think I got a lot more traditionally anxious, like, the
Yeah.
butterflies and palpitations. And I was like, oh my God, like, and I've had insomnia my whole life, which is probably why I have so many hobbies and interests. I've got this extra little bit of time to think about things. And a lot of my best ideas come when I just like can't sleep in the middle of the night. But like a lot of that is driven by, mostly work related anxiety and, for the past handful of years, just like the world is tough in general.
Yeah, I mean, current events and affairs notwithstanding, I get the whole like managing anxiety thing, which I think is like lots of people, creative or otherwise, deal with that. I think it hits
Absolutely.
creative types in a special way. Especially when you're out there on your own. I'm really excited that you have kind of taken a sidestep and are focusing on parts per million for a year of experimentation. I mean, I think that's a natural evolution for you where you can hop to like different projects. But, to kind of shift gears, because I do want to move on to
Yep.
like the photography side. Before we get fully into it, it's like to balance the work and the career and all that. Like, how do you find time to have some creative output, to have something that's for you that feeds the soul?
Yeah, I mean,
that's what I'm curious about, because you're a busy guy, and as we're going to talk about, you also have quite the like side hustle photography career happening.
Sure.
So, I'm just curious how you fit it all in and find some time for yourself. This episode is brought to you by Born Rival. Born Rival is a multidisciplinary brand that celebrates film culture and the use of visual media as a form of expression. Their products are made in the heart of New York City and are an extension of their storytelling spirit. In addition to apparel, they also produce original films and editorial spotlights that feature image makers and storytellers. As a brand, they're embracing the process of creating instead of focusing on the end frame or final cut. Visit bornrival.com to check out their recent collections and films, and be sure to enter code NOSETPATH at checkout to receive 20% off your first order. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to your statement where like it seems like I'm interested in complicated things and learning about them and solving them, and certainly in some ways work in a bad way. Yeah, I just want to like figure out how something works and make it better. And like, I can do that in friendships, relationships, like my family. My parents are getting older and I'm trying to like solve that stuff because I'm like, I can do it, even though like, the sort of American medical environment is a tough thing. Like there's no way I can personally solve it by myself, but I feel like there are ways I can make it easier for my parents and for, my family, maybe my friends, to like make that better. And so, yeah, that's been something that's been very true. I like a challenge. I like figuring stuff out. I like process and refining things to make it better for everyone. And collaboration, like even from being in a band to like working at an agency to like working in-house, like it's all about the people that are around you. And I don't like doing things by myself. I may be the person who's like often at the forefront of it, but I really enjoy the different tools and skills and friendship and ideas that come from surrounding yourself with like people who are better than me, frankly, but also just like different. And so I don't believe in monoculture. Like I try to build teams that are like incredibly diverse so that we are pulling from all those experiences. And that in and of itself is hard and something I learned later, but really valuable.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I say all of that because, yeah, photography, I'd been taking a lot of photos. The iPhone came out in 2007. I moved to New York City in 2010. I got my first iPhone that year. And then Instagram came out, I think, the next year. And prior to that, I had taken photos, as a hobby on tour, a lot of band photos and live music stuff. And I would take photos for design projects where we didn't have a budget. I would just like go and make the photographs. But yeah, I went on a road trip with two really talented photographers, John Deeb, and who's based in Orlando, Florida, and then John Paul Douglas, who's based in LA now. And we had this really awesome loft space. Designers, musicians, engineers. It was just like a crazy place. And we would open all our doors up and throw Halloween parties. And on the weekends, we would just make stuff. And so we would like make little videos and we would assign little projects for ourselves. And coming out of that, we went on a road trip to Chicago. John's partner at the time was living there, and we were going up to deliver a car. And along the way, we made a few stops and rented a cabin and went swimming. And I noticed they were uploading photos to Tumblr every day. And I was
oh,
like,
Tumblr, taking it back. Yeah.
I mean, this was 2009, I think.
Nice. Yeah, totally.
And I was like, that's cool. And I had bought a camera and I was shooting a lot. It was like a Canon G10 or something, like a little point and shoot. And a girlfriend at the time was a professional photographer in Nashville. And she is super talented and was really inspiring. And like, I think I just like had a bunch of great photographers around me, and it made me want to be a better photographer. But especially that road trip, them uploading to Tumblr every day, I was like, cool, I'll do that. And so it became a challenge of like, well, I need to get one good photo a day. And if I can get one photo, then I can upload it and I feel like I've done this thing. And so I started doing that, and I started to upload a photo every day to Tumblr for a while. And I moved to New York the following year, and New York's so walkable. I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna like walk to work. Like, why would I?
Yeah, well, I mean, New York is a photographer's playground. Yeah. I mean, it's always changing. The light's always changing. The landscape's always changing. Yeah, it's hard not to go down the photography rabbit hole if that's your thing, living in New York.
Yeah, and so I started taking photos on my walk, and then Instagram came out like a year later, and then that was a place to put my photos. And I would like take a photo in real time on my phone and post it to Instagram, and I just really enjoyed it. And it started off as like, oh, I'm just like, they weren't good photos, but I liked documenting sort of this little like world that I lived in, this like however many square miles that I was walking around every day. And I would take a different path to work and discover new stuff that I never saw before, and just really enjoyed it and got very serious about it, and just shot a lot with the iPhone for a really, really long time, for like 5 years. And I had a little Lumix GX that I was shooting with when I traveled, and I made a few travel journals on a website, whiskeyweather.com, which is still up. And that was fun. And it, I was a very much like an Instagram purist. Like, I posted in real time only with my phone. And at a certain point, I felt like I was doing myself a disservice, because I could see better photos that I felt like I wasn't able to capture with the phone. And this was like an iPhone 4 or something, right? It's not like today, I think iPhone cameras are incredible, and I think you can capture a lot of really amazing stuff. But at the time, I was working really long hours at a tech startup, and I was mostly trying to shoot at night, and the iPhone couldn't shoot at night. And so I did some research, and Sony had just come out with the A7 II, I think it was at that time. And I bought it because it had the best low light performance. I was like, well, if I'm working all day, every day, and I'm shooting at night, I want something that can shoot at night. Otherwise, I can just keep shooting on my phone. And I got that camera, and at that time I stopped working in Brooklyn at Etsy, and I started working in Manhattan at PepsiCo. And I would still walk. So I would take the train to the first stop into New York City, and I would walk the rest of the way in Manhattan to work. And I would do that before and after work. And it was just like very satisfying. And it became a challenge in terms of, I did a lot of art direction and creative direction, and worked with amazing studio photographers and really amazing commercial directors. And that was great. And it was very controlled, and layers of approvals, and we would storyboard, and we'd, all the normal stuff that happens in production. But like the street photography stuff was just like, it required nothing, no models, no lighting, no studio. I could just walk outside and like make art. And it was freeing. And then, you multiply that by, you talk about how I seem to be drawn to challenging things. Like, street photography is really hard. Like, I think there's a genre of street photography that's sort of like portraits, where you walk up and take a photo, put a flash in someone's face. And I think those have their place. And I think they're really beautiful images, but they tend to have a sameness about them. Whereas like really looking for things that no one else sees and putting them together in a way that's like well composed and really thoughtful, and doing it all on the fly is like such an incredible challenge that I just never get tired of. And that was a big part of it. And then
Yeah.
as I got more stressed out at work, photography became walking meditation, where that anxiety brain, like very buzzy, a million ideas, a million things, like that's like my superpower. You said you view me as like an idea person or whatever. Yeah, I'm like really good at really quickly iterating on creative things and coming up with ideas and making successful stuff out of it. And a lot of it just has to do with that very quick-minded, almost like ADHD sort of capability. But when you're not in it and you're just sitting in bed or you're, doing something else, it's like not debilitating, but it can really take a toll. And so photography is just a singular focus. Put in some headphones, I start walking, and the only goal is to observe and try to capture something interesting. And it became walking meditation to the point I was walking, on average 7 miles a day, on a good day, 20 plus miles a day. And it was just like a release from everything, whether it's something in my personal life or something in my work life. Yeah, photography just became, it sort of took up the place of music in terms of like I had stopped touring, I had stopped performing. I was just like working on stuff at home by myself, but like walking around and taking pictures just sort of like really helped me from a mental health perspective, in addition to like an artist perspective.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the statement that it can be a walking meditation. And I'm similarly disposed where I feel like there's always a lot going on upstairs all the time. And I need things to kind of focus my energy and give me that like meditative moment. And photography's definitely done that for me. I, as a street photographer, am pretty much a weenie. I'm not a great street photographer. And I don't know, getting in people's faces and taking like the candid portraits and that kind of thing was never my jam. One thing that I really love about your street photography is it's almost finding like it's stopping what I see as a moving scene in one moment, right? So it's almost taking a still frame from a movie and creating this like little vignette. And so the people and the subjects that you have in your frame, I find it in like a very satisfying, like artful way that like I gravitate to. And it's really great that it started as this, and I'm assuming continues to be this kind of meditative creative practice, but it's also grown for you. I mean, as of today, I just checked, it's like you're over 36,000 followers on Instagram, which is amazing. You're also doing a color workshop at Adobe Max this year. Do you feel more empowered as a photographer, or do you feel like maybe there's some loss of luster? I guess a simpler way to say it is like, does it still remain a hobby, or are you trying to like build it into something bigger for yourself?
So yeah, photography really took off. I did a project called Street Weekly starting in 2017. It was a hashtag project that was just basically at the end of every week, I would just like do a photo dump. I would just share, whatever photos I took in that 7 days. And then people started tagging it. And so I started doing a feature where I would feature people every week who had posted within the past 7 days. And it was really fun, but it grew very quickly. I think I went from like 5,000 to 30,000 followers like very quickly because it was such a organic community type of experience, which I think is important. I never sought out to grow, And at one point I was at 41,000 followers, but I kind of stopped posting. I still post stories a lot, but I don't know. I'm trying to take a step back from phone screens and just really spend a lot more time taking pictures and editing pictures and talking to other photographers and things like that. But all of that is sort of, to answer your question, photography is probably 30% of my income now, 25 to 30%. And some of those are partnerships, some of them are commissions, some of them are test prints or limited edition prints or NFTs even. But like my whole goal with photography, and I firmly believe this to be true, I don't think you need to turn your hobbies into businesses. Like your passion doesn't have to become profit. And so I've been very careful that any commission I take or any projects I work on, it's still within the philosophy of how I would take photos anyway. And what that means is like, like I'm accepting of art direction. I want an understanding. I want to make sure I'm delivering the best possible thing to my partners and clients, but also a lot of my work is valuable because of the improvisational nature. And this is true of parts per million music and photography. There's like this clear sort of connection there. But I think a lot of the most interesting stuff happens sort of in the margins. And, a lot of people are striving for perfection. I think new is better than perfect. And just discovering something kind of new and having those happy accidents and making those mistakes, I think opens you up to finding way more interesting things than just pursuing, oh, I had this idea in my head and I'm trying to capture the purest form of this idea, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that's less interesting to me as a artist, but especially as a photographer. You never know exactly where you're going to get, but like what you're going to get, I've proven to be able to deliver it and do it over and over again. And so it's sort of like a little bit of trust, but I think the work is kind of more interesting because of it, and it's a lot harder to duplicate. For example, if like, a brand's really trying to stand out for a particular moment, it's not just a stock style lifestyle photograph, which kind of comes into like as AI grows, and maybe it's because I'm the generation before the internet and I've lived through that, and then the generation before the iPhone and I've lived through that, and now, there's AI. I think a lot of illustrators and photographers who do that type of like standard commercial lifestyle photography or like spot illustrations, I think they're going to have a really hard time versus I think other people who are idea oriented and like embrace sort of the accidents and weirdness and have a point of view. I think that stuff is going to be not impossible to duplicate with AI, but harder to do with like, I think, clarity and purpose compared to maybe some of that other stuff. But I don't know. Who knows?
I really agree hard with that statement of like, you don't need to make money off of your passions. You can make some, and that's cool. Like specifically because we're on the photography thing, like that's always something I've kept for myself. I really love going out and like shooting film. My Pentax 6.7 is like my OG favorite. It's just impossible to take anywhere conveniently. And I've like taken the occasional photography gig, but I've always been careful to make sure it's like easy and chill and I can kind of just do what I want for the most part. But it's never been something I've pursued as like weaving into the portfolio of services that I offer, because it's something I want to keep for myself. And I think that's really, really smart.
Yeah.
To really build this framework or build this context where it's like, yeah, I'll take some paid work, I'll take some commissions or whatever, but there's like kind of these checks that you need to hit for it to make sense for you.
Yeah, in the end, like, one of parts per million and my personal sort of philosophies, especially in this back half of my career, is like to be incredibly satisfying to work with. And I think that manifests in lots of different ways. But the first step to that is like having a good collaboration, like having the right client fit, having the right, sort of organizational fit. And so, yeah, I so far have been able to be very picky about photography commissions. And then I also have the benefit of being on the other side, the agency side of like knowing licensing and terms and day rates and different things, which, often I help out other photographers. Like I turned Street Weekly into streetweek.com as a resource for photographers. And a lot of my friends kind of ask like, hey, I got asked to do this project. Can you help me put together like a statement of work or whatever? And I'm happy to do that, because I think if we're all asking for the right fees and doing work, we're kind of raising the bar. And, you don't, and I think it's okay if you're starting out and you want to take a gig for like $100, and that's fine. But like, I think I would love like a standards of practice for photography where, we all have a baseline of what we're asking for, so that people aren't making commission decisions just based on like who's the cheapest. They're trying to find who the right person is. I mean, there's obviously journalism unions and things like that I am not lucky enough to be a part of, but I would love to just see it mature a little bit, especially post content creator world, like as Web 2.0 kind of gets quieter. I think it opened up where a lot of either there's influencers who charge a ton of money for very little creativity. It's more for reach, which I think reach is really important for brands. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
Or it's sort of like, these photographers, people come to the photographer because the expectation is that, oh, it'll be cheap. And so if we can kind of raise that bar a little bit, I think it's exciting. And I've said no to a ton of projects just because, if it's something really exciting, like, of course I will be flexible, but I don't know, like, I don't want to do hard work for free. It goes back to that, like, what's the cost of a sunny day philosophy? Like, in the end, especially in this world of capitalism, it's not that, like, oh, you're doing it for free. No, you're volunteering your time to help someone else make money. And, it's different if it's a nonprofit or if it's some type of organization that you care about, or, like, Parts Per Million, we've been giving discounts to minority-owned businesses and nonprofits because I believe that work is really important and I want to do more of it. But I'm not going to just go out and give my expertise and energy and time away just so someone else can make more money off of my work, which it sounds kind of shitty. Like, I feel like I'm being very elitist about it, but it's more like mental health and recognizing the value that I bring to a project, whether as a photographer or as a creative director. And just like, I don't know, man, a lot of people have gotten rich off of other people's hard work. And that's just been the expectation. And I don't like that expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. I can say with that, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you are not being elitist. And I think that's the thing is that I think understanding a creative profession for a lot of people is hard.
Yeah.
Because valuing creativity is not black and white. So I don't think it's shitty or elitist to place X amount of value on what you bring to the table. I think everybody should do that and should always be reevaluating and reassessing as they develop as a creative, as an artist. As you build your skills and you get better and better, you should constantly be reevaluating, well, what am I worth? What am I bringing to the table? I totally agree with that. And I also agree with the fact that the more resources, the better. Like a rising tide raises all ships, that kind of mentality, right? In my world, in the, filmmaking, commercial world, things like that, I feel like there's almost a race to the bottom mentality that I'm always fighting, where it's, I try to, hold myself to like a certain standard of rates. And it's hard when there's always going to be somebody who's going to do it for cheaper. There will always be someone who will do it for cheaper. It doesn't mean they're going to do it better, but I think it needs to be a mentality shift. And I don't slight people, especially now where it's been a weird economic few years with COVID and post-COVID existence. Like people got to eat. I get it, but it's definitely something I feel passionate about, and I'm like on the same page with you. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, it's really been amplified. I mean, this year, again, it's been an experiment. It started off gangbusters, and I think I purposely built in time off, which I've never done, in May to like take a little time and reset. Because the way that Parts Per Million works is we work in sprints. A sprint is 5 days of heads down work, and usually 2 weeks ahead of that to set the brief and make sure we're on the same page so we can make decisions quickly. But we only do 10 sprints a year, oftentimes 8. And so a lot of that, like, it gives us the flexibility, one, to give all of our attention to a specific client for that window of time. It's not like, I see a lot of other creative studios offering sprints, but they're doing it as like an add-on to their everyday business. And so they're pulling people off of projects and managing stuff. That's just, I think that's a lot harder. And our philosophy is really all about, transformative ideas don't take time, they take focus. And it's all about this focus state. And the only way we can do that effectively is to only focus on sort of one client at a time, which, means that we charge a little bit more, but I think the output is really strong. But yeah, man, like, I've sent a lot of RFPs out over the past 2 months and either have been ghosted or have been asked to come down on price. And yeah, it's a really tough year, I think, for creatives. And I get lots of messages, text messages, LinkedIn messages, emails from people I've worked with for decades who are like, hey, do you have any work right now? I think it's like there's that probably 400 to 500,000 people were laid off in the tech sector between November of last year and January of this year. And I see a lot of those people doing really interesting stuff now, which I am thankful for. I want them to create their own businesses, but for a lot of us, especially in creative services, yeah, it's like lean times.
Yeah.
And I see it coming back. Like I see more job postings. I'm getting more sort of RFPs in and different things. But like, yeah, it's hard to say no. And I have the benefit. My wife started her interior design and architecture company in 2018, but she's been managing like an extraordinary team for a long time now, comparatively to me being on my own. And yeah, she's had a lot of ups and downs and huge successes followed by really quiet times, but she's incredible and her team is super talented. And yeah, I've gotten sort of like some insights into a different industry, but sort of there's a dotted line there. And yeah, she's sort of had to take some projects she didn't want to, and she's also done really great projects for less money that are now like a cornerstone of her business moving forward. So I'm cheating a little bit because I have an amazing partner who I've been able to sort of observe from the sidelines and see some of her challenges and successes and see what I can learn from that also. And, she's really generous with that time.
I find it really interesting that, you can bounce from industry to industry that seem completely unrelated.
Yeah.
But there are all these through lines or people are having similar experiences. I'll post a behind the scenes shot from a job I'm on, and I'll get people saying, "Oh, glad you're working this year." I'm like, yep. I'm not really working that much, but thank you. It's interesting to hear that about your wife and kind of, what you've taken away from watching her work. I find it very interesting that the industries can feel almost unrelated.
Yeah.
Interior design versus brand versus filmmaking or photography, but there are all these through lines, whether they're oftentimes it seems like more the challenges are similar than not. Mm-hmm. Everybody has those ups and downs and those things that they work through. It's fascinating, and just kind of one of the things I always take away from this, doing this show is how much similarity there is. Before we wrap up, so tell me quickly how you got involved this year's Adobe Max. I do want to unpack that since I want to get this out the door before you go there.
Yeah. So I've, like many of us, you heard at the top, I had a pirated version of Photoshop, but I've been using
Everybody
Adobe,
had a pirated version of
had.
Photoshop.
But I've been using Adobe products literally my entire career, and even before it was a career. And so, John, my friend who I did that road trip with in Florida, he introduced me to Lightroom when it came out, and I was doing everything in Photoshop, like one-off, and I was really excited about the non-destructive editing and just like the lighter touch to photography. And so that became my main sort of source for like building my catalog, managing my archive, and then editing my photos. And so I've been using Lightroom for a long time, and I get a lot of questions. Oh, what plugin did you use? Or like, how did you do this color? And I'm like, I just built it. It's just me. And sure. Yeah. And thankfully, because of Instagram and my relationships that I've made through Instagram with other photographers and things, Adobe has invited me to a few different events as just a spectator. And I think in 2019, I went to the first sort of Adobe Lightroom ambassador group. And I'm not an ambassador, although I'm more than happy to be. And so I went to a happy hour, and Pei, who I think manages the Lightroom ambassador program, I've met her over the years a few times, and she's been really great and very complimentary of my work. And this year I went to that same happy hour with a couple friends, Billy D on Instagram. He's just an incredible photographer, probably my favorite New York photographer right now, but he is recently a Lightroom ambassador. And so we were hanging out, and he was doing a walk, and I just like started talking with Pei, and she's like, oh, what would be great? We have these new tools coming out. I won't say any more than that. And she's like, your color work is amazing. Would you be interested in doing like a color grading workshop at an Adobe event? I was like, yeah, let me know, whatever you want. Like, love Lightroom. Like, would love to be involved with Adobe. And then later on, that became like, all right, well, like, let's do this for Adobe Max, which is amazing. Like when I was,
it's a huge deal.
Yeah, it's huge. And like, I don't know, I feel like hopefully it's good. It's 25 minutes, right? I'm like, all right. And so I've written and rewritten it and tried to get it tight and so that it's clear and people can understand it. And it's been a fun challenge, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, and I hope it kind of, I think when I look at Adobe Max, it's like artists or creatives talking to other creatives. So it's not necessarily like a B2B brand building moment, but I don't know. I always want to do things well, and I've done when I worked with Skillshare, we did various main stage Adobe Max productions. And so like being, working with the Adobe team and planning that stuff and shooting it and like doing like real productions was really interesting. So kind of transitioning from that to like being a speaker and kind of running it on my own will be, yeah, it'll be interesting. And I hope I do Adobe proud, and I hope people who like my work learn something from it. But I think it'll be really fun. It'll be great.
I'm sure you'll do just fine. I have no doubt. Before I let you go, is there something you would have done sooner? Hindsight being 2020, would you have done anything differently? And I guess part two or like a B section to that is, if somebody's just getting into exploring their own creativity, just taking age out of the equation, but if they really want to pursue creativity, whether that's design, photography, what have you, wholeheartedly, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, my junior designers or employees or people who are younger, working with me today are much smarter than I was at, 22 or however old. And I think a lot of that has to do with burnout and like the late stage capitalism problem. And they're a lot more, they've been trained, rightfully so and in a good way, to recognize burnout and ask for what they're worth and ask for promotions and ask for time off and say they won't work late. And I think that's really good. I think that there's probably a balance that, will need to be sorted out, that it's not even, I don't think people feel entitled. I think they're taking care of themselves in a really important way. And I think that's probably some advice I would give. And you kind of heard me touch on it before in terms of like, cool, like I'm getting a lower salary or less benefits. And it's not because I'm not worth it. It's because like someone else doesn't want to pay that to me because they want to put more money in their pocket. And I think recognizing that, I think design can be art, but I think in the environment that I work in, it's very much like commercial art, and commercial is inherently tied to money. And so I think understanding that before, if there's something you're really interested in and you want to like quote unquote hustle or whatever, I think that's great. I myself am a workaholic. I don't have any chill. I want to do things well because I care about the idea of craft and just doing things well for the sake of doing them well. And that's sort of why I underpromise and overdeliver on everything, from our sprints to photography or whatever. Like, I just want to do a good job because I care about the craft of the thing. And I think people should still do that. But I think at the beginning, they should understand the relationship to money in a really authentic way. There's a lot of questions around in creative services and design and production and whatever. Like, what does that look like as I think the bar for quality gets lower and people want to spend less money? And we're seeing with like, started with content and now it's like TikTok and, user generated advertising and marketing and infomercials. It's just sort of like a little bit of a race to the bottom. And I think so much of that is driven by what I would consider an MBA mentality versus what is really important in terms of like brand is just like, how do people feel? And so it's like, oh, well, we can do this ad really cheap. We're going to get all this reach. But like, what do people think about it? And a lot of times I think we encounter these very serious like marketers who are talented and experienced, and they don't have any sense of play. It's like all business. And it's so over indexed on being data driven that the benchmarks that are largely internal facing, as long as they're hitting them, everything's fine. But the whole reason those numbers are being tracked at all are like real people in the world. Those are two things I think a lot about.
Yeah.
Like, what's the cost of a sunny day? Like, what's our work's relationship to money? How do we perform this work in a way that's like valuable, not just monetarily, but to ourselves and to the people we're working with? How do we work collaboratively and empathetically? And then in the end, the work that we're doing, are we too fussy about it? Are we too worried about like the details of the internal mechanisms of the work and not enough about the people that the work is theoretically supposed to be impacting? So I think those are like two takeaways.
Pay a little more attention to your intention, I guess. Yeah. Jeremy, thank you so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great.
If people want to find you online, where can they go?
Yeah, so my brand consultancy is called Parts Per Million. You can find us at ppm.nyc or partspermillion.nyc. And then for photography, I'm everywhere on the internet as Sleeping Planes. So at Sleeping Planes on every social platform, and then sleepingplanes.com features places where you can buy my work and see my work and see some commissions and hire me if you'd like to. So those are the easiest places.
I love it, man. I love the name Parts Per Million too. Really, really great. Really
yeah,
great.
I mean, it's all about a unit of concentration, like getting all the right people together in terms of collaboration, and then being really focused and concentrated in the way we do the work. Less noise, really like getting down to it and doing the important work. I listened to Paula Scher recently did an interview, and she was talking about working at CBS Records, I think it was, and she's like, yeah, we would work really hard and we would get all these revisions over and over and over again, and then Wednesday we would do the work, start over again, and then it would ship because that was the deadline. And she's like, why did we bother doing anything before Wednesday? And I think a lot of work happens that way, and I'm trying to like reimagine work. Like, what is the philosophy and how can we do creative work in a way that is effective but also meaningful to the audience and to the people making it?
I love it. I think it's really great. Well, thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thanks, man. This is fun. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I can get excited, but I appreciate your thoughtful questions and patience and your time and attention, and just like listening to me talk about stuff that, I don't know, maybe someone out there cares about, but it's important.
Anytime.
Cool.
All right, everybody, there you go. That was my interview with Jeremy Perez-Cruz. I'll be sure to link to everything he has to offer in the show notes for this episode. Go check him out online. He's a super talented guy. And if I can find a streaming link for the session he's giving at Adobe Max, I will be sure to link that in the show notes as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please visit nosetpath.com or find us on NoSetPath Podcast on Instagram. And you can learn more about me, your host, Drew English, at drewenglish.com. And Instagram is at Drew English with 2 H's at the end. As always, wherever you're listening, like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star review always helps us out. And we will see you on season 2 of No Set Path. Take it easy.